I landed a $400,000 a year job, and my father demanded 50% for us, 30% for your sister. No excuses. That afternoon, I packed my things and stopped covering their bills. Now they're on their way. Okay, you are not going to believe what happened to me. I finally landed my dream job, a position with a $400,000 salary that felt like winning the lottery after literally decades of struggle. But the moment I shared the news, my own father looked me dead in the eyes and demanded 80% of it for him and my sister. That was the day I packed my bags, severed every financial tie, and finally stood up for myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, growing up in a modest 3-bedroom house in Chicago. It was a place that always needed fixing, repairs my father, Richard, a sales manager at a car dealership, never seemed to get around to. On paper, he made good money, but you'd never know it by how he lived. Dad was a towering figure, 6 feet 2 inches, with a booming voice that commanded attention. He controlled everything, especially the money. Money doesn't grow on trees, Harley. He'd lecture constantly. Everything in this house comes from my hard work. The crushing irony? Most of our problems stemmed from his gambling. Every other weekend, he'd vanish to the riverboat casinos, returning either briefly jubilant or, more often, sullen and quick to anger after losing it all. My mother, Diane, was his complete opposite. Petite, soft-spoken, she worked as a receptionist, but her paycheck simply vanished into the family pot without a word from her. She'd just nod along, her eyes downcast, her opinions silenced years ago. Your father knows best, she'd whisper to me whenever I dared question anything. Just try not to upset him. Her whole existence seemed dedicated to keeping the peace, even at the cost of her own dignity. And then there was my sister, Amanda, 2 years younger, but always the center of attention. She was the golden child. New clothes while I wore hand-me-downs. Her extracurriculars were priorities. Mine were luxuries we couldn't afford. Your sister is more delicate than you, Mom would explain. She needs more support. This meant Amanda never worked a day in high school. Me? I started bussing tables at 14, just to have money for school supplies. Our household had this predictable, exhausting rhythm. Financial crisis, a brief, temporary relief, then another crisis. The electricity would get cut off. Dad would borrow from his brother. Then came the lectures about spending less. And within months, we'd be right back in the same mess. Through it all, I was expected to contribute, while Amanda was shielded. The summer before my sophomore year, I landed my first official job at a grocery store. I still remember the burst of pride getting my first paycheck, $326 for 2 weeks of after-school shifts. But that pride evaporated the instant I walked through the door. My father held out his hand. Family contribution, he declared, taking the entire check. This will help with the water bill. I never saw a penny of that money, or most of the paychecks that followed. Meanwhile, Amanda got a $100 allowance monthly for her grades, even though mine were consistently better. Technology became my escape. The school computer lab was my sanctuary. I taught myself coding through free online resources, spending hours at the public library when our home internet was cut off. While my father gambled away his paychecks and my mother made excuses, I was building my future. Always on those computers, my father would scoff. How's that going to put food on the table? Despite his dismissal, I won a partial scholarship to the state university. It only covered about 60% of tuition, so I worked 2 part-time jobs all through college, paying for books and living expenses. I lived in the cheapest apartment I could find, sharing a 2-bedroom with 3 other students, just to make ends meet. Even then, the financial demands from home never stopped. Every crisis somehow became my responsibility. Car repairs, medical bills, the time Amanda crashed her car without insurance. We supported you your whole life, my father would remind me during his calls asking for money. This is what family does. What really twisted the knife was how he'd take credit for my achievements in front of others. At family gatherings, he'd brag about putting his son through college, as if my success was his creation, not something I'd scraped for despite him. The absolute final straw from my college years came when I had finally saved $2,000 for a used car. I'd been taking the bus for over an hour each way to classes and work. The money was in my account for less than a week when my parents called, frantic about a property tax bill they'd forgotten. 3 days of relentless guilt trips, my mother crying on the phone, and I transferred the money. 2 months later, they bought Amanda a spring break trip to Florida. These patterns just kept repeating through my early 20s. Every time I tried to claw my way to independence, some family emergency would yank me back in. I became the family bank, expected to provide without question while trying to build my own life from nothing. The worst part? I normalized it. I genuinely believe this was just what families did, that children were meant to support their parents indefinitely, regardless of the cost to their own future. After graduating, I took a junior developer position at a small software company in Chicago. The starting salary was modest, $48,000, but it was my foot in the door. My first apartment was barely 500 square feet, a studio so tiny my knees hit the wall on the toilet. But it was mine, paid for with my money, and that meant everything. The learning curve was brutal. My colleagues seemed light years ahead. But instead of getting discouraged, I saw it as an opportunity. I stayed late every night, soaking up everything, volunteering for projects no one else wanted. "You're not getting paid for those extra hours," my father commented on a Sunday call. "I'm getting paid in knowledge," I replied, a concept he never seemed to grasp. While my day job provided stability, I knew I needed more. After my regular 9 to 5, I took night courses, earning certifications in network security and database management. My social life was non-existent, but every new skill was another step closer to the career I envisioned. By my second year, I got my first promotion to mid-level developer, salary jumping to $62,000. It was still modest, but it was progress. I celebrated by buying a reliable used Honda and opening my first investment account with $200 monthly automatic deposits. My third year brought another promotion to senior developer, along with $78,000 annually. I moved to a slightly larger apartment, still keeping my expenses low, the instability of my childhood etched in my mind. Throughout it all, the calls from home never stopped. Amanda needed help with credit card debt. The roof was leaking. Dad had a temporary cash flow problem. Each time, I'd help, but I started setting limits, offering what I could afford, not what they demanded. "We didn't raise you to be selfish," my mother said when I could only send $500 instead of the $2,000 they wanted for Amanda's car repairs. By my late 20s, I job hopped to a medium-sized tech company, pushing my salary to $110,000. I was finally building real savings and investments. I'd specialized in cloud architecture, an emerging field with huge demand. I became known for solving complex problems others avoided. But the most valuable relationship I built during these years was with Michael, a senior architect I met at a conference. He was 10 years older, incredibly accomplished, and crucially, he saw my potential before I fully did. "You're undervaluing yourself," he told me over beers. "You could be making twice what you are now at the right company." With Michael's encouragement, I started applying for more ambitious positions. There were rejections, interviews where I was clearly out of my depth, but each one was a lesson. I'd take notes, then go home and study until I mastered those topics. Last month, an opportunity arose at Horizon Technologies, one of the most innovative cloud service providers in the country. They needed a principal cloud architect to lead a new AI integration division. It required extensive experience in the very technologies I'd specialized in for years. The interview process was grueling. 4 rounds over 3 weeks, including a technical challenge that demanded I design a scalable architecture for a hypothetical client. I spent an entire weekend on it, barely sleeping. Then my phone rang. I was walking to my car after a long day at my current job. The recruiter's voice was electric. "We'd like to offer you the principal cloud architect position, Harley. The compensation package includes a base salary of $400,000 annually, plus performance bonuses and stock options." I had to ask her to repeat it, certain I'd misheard. $400,000. It was nearly 4 times my current salary. I just stood in the parking lot, keys in hand, unable to move, as the reality sank in. This was life-changing money. The kind of income that could secure my future, let me buy a home, build substantial investments, finally achieve the financial security I'd worked for my entire adult life. That evening, Michael and I celebrated at our favorite bar. He ordered champagne, insisting it deserved proper recognition. "I told you," he said, raising his glass. "They're lucky to have you. This is just the beginning." As we talked about the opportunity, Michael asked about my plans for the money. "First, a down payment on a condo," I said. then maxing out retirement accounts. Maybe actually taking a vacation for once. Your family will be thrilled, Michael commented. And that's when a sharp twinge of anxiety hit me. Despite our complicated history, I still wanted to share my success with my parents and sister. Part of me hoped that with this achievement, they might finally see me differently. Not as a resource to tap, but as a son who had accomplished something significant. So, I decided to drive to their house that weekend to share the news in person, imagining proud faces, maybe even an acknowledgement of how far I'd come. It was a decision I would soon deeply, deeply regret. I arrived at my parents' house that Saturday evening, carrying a bottle of champagne and 3 takeout bags from their favorite steakhouse. The familiar scent of my mother's potpourri mixed with the musty smell of the aging carpet. The house looked the same, worn, furniture showing its age, paint slightly yellowed. Look who finally remembered where he came from. My father called from his recliner, not bothering to get up, a beer balanced on the armrest, glued to a baseball game. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Harley, what a surprise. And you brought food. Her eyes lit up. Amanda, your brother is here with dinner. Amanda appeared from upstairs, hair wrapped in a towel. At 32, she still lived at home, working part-time at a boutique while my parents covered most of her expenses. She broke into a smile seeing the food. Fancy steakhouse. What's the occasion? She asked, peering into the bags. I helped Mom set the table, explaining I had news. Once we were all seated, with plates of filet mignon and loaded baked potatoes, I took a deep breath. I got a new job, I began, trying to keep my voice casual despite my excitement. A principal cloud architect position at Horizon Technologies. Never heard of them, my father said between bites. They pay better than your current place? This was it. Yes, significantly better. The base salary is $400,000 a year. The reaction was immediate. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Amanda's eyes widened into perfect circles. My father stopped chewing mid-bite, then slowly resumed, his expression calculating. $400,000, my mother repeated, her voice hushed, as if saying it too loudly might make it disappear. Oh, Harley, that's wonderful. My little brother is rich. Amanda exclaimed, reaching over to punch my arm playfully. I always knew all that computer stuff would pay off someday. My father remained silent, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He took a long swig of his beer, set it down deliberately, then fixed his gaze on me. When do you start? He asked. 3 weeks from Monday, I replied. I need to wrap things up at my current job first. And when does the first paycheck come in? The question struck me as odd, but I answered anyway. They pay bi-weekly, so probably about 5 weeks from now. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. The conversation moved on. My mother asked about the office. Amanda wondered if I'd buy a new car. The initial tension I'd felt began to ease. Maybe this would be the positive turning point I'd hoped for. After dinner, as we moved to the living room with cheesecake, my father cleared his throat loudly, the sound I recognized from childhood, his preamble to an important pronouncement. Your mother and I have been talking, he began, though this was clearly news to my mother, whose expression showed pure confusion, about our retirement and Amanda's future. I nodded, a knot tightening in my stomach. We've supported you your whole life, he said, using the same old line he always deployed before asking for money. Put a roof over your head, food in your mouth, clothes on your back. Now you've finally made it, thanks to the foundation we provided. I appreciate everything you've done, I said carefully, already sensing where this was heading. Good, he snapped, because now it's time for you to show that appreciation in a meaningful way. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. With your new salary, we've worked out what would be fair for everyone. Amanda was nodding along, suddenly very interested. My mother looked down at her hands. 50% for us, my father stated flatly. 30% for your sister. No excuses. The room went absolutely silent. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline to what surely had to be a joke. But his expression was serious, expectant even. You want 80% of my salary? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. We raised you, he replied, as if that explained everything. And now we need to secure our retirement. The house needs work. Your mother deserves to stop working at that dental office, and I want to finally enjoy life after decades of supporting this family. And I need to pay off my student loans, Amanda chimed in. Plus, I want to open my own boutique someday. You know, I've always dreamed of that. I looked at my mother, desperate for some sign. She found this as outrageous as I did, but she just gave a small shrug. Your father has thought this through, she said softly. We're family, after all. My mind was racing, doing quick calculations. They wanted $320,000 of my $400,000 salary. That would leave me with $80,000, which was actually less than I currently made. That would leave me with less than what I make now, I pointed out. But you'll get raises and bonuses, my father countered. And you've always been good at living frugally. Besides, what do you need all that money for? You're single, no kids. We have real needs. The conversation quickly devolved into an argument as I tried to explain that while I was happy to help, giving up 80% of my income was simply not reasonable. My father's tone grew increasingly irritated. After all we sacrificed for you, he said, his voice rising. All the nights your mother stayed up helping with your homework, all the meals we put on the table, all the guidance we provided. And this is how you repay us? With selfishness. Amanda joined in, listing all the times she'd been there for me emotionally over the years, as if that justified a $120,000 annual stipend. The more I resisted, the more intense their pressure became. I have bills to pay too, I tried to explain. And I want to buy a home, invest for my own future. Your future? My father scoffed. What about our future? What about everything we gave up so you could have opportunities? The argument reached its climax when my father stood up, towering over me just like he had when I was a child. This is not a request, Harley. This is what you owe us. We are your family. If you turn your back on family, you have nothing. His expression hardened. So what's it going to be? Are you with your family? Or are you one of those ungrateful children who abandons the people who gave him life once he has money? I looked around at the three expectant faces, each with their own version of entitlement, and suddenly saw with perfect, terrifying clarity what the rest of my life would look like if I agreed. This would never end. The percentages might change, but the expectation that my earnings belonged more to them than to me would remain constant. I need some air, I said, standing up and walking out the front door without waiting for a response. Behind me, I heard my father call out, "Think carefully about your next move, son. Family is forever, but so are the consequences of turning your back on us." The cool evening air hit my face as I walked to my car, my hands shaking slightly as I fumbled for my keys. I didn't pull out of the driveway immediately. I just sat there, trying to process what had just happened. The champagne I'd brought to celebrate now felt like a cruel joke. I drove aimlessly around the neighborhood where I grew up, past the elementary school, past the corner store, past the park where I'd spent countless hours alone when the tension at home became too much. Each familiar landmark carried the weight of memories, most of them tinged with the same dynamics I'd just experienced. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Amanda and my mother, but I ignored them. I needed space to think, to understand my own feelings without their voices in my head. After about an hour of driving in circles, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner that had been a refuge during my high school years. The same neon sign flickered above the entrance, promising comfort, food, and anonymity. Sliding into a booth, I ordered coffee and tried to sort through the tumult of emotions. Anger, certainly. Disappointment, hurt. But beneath those immediate reactions was something deeper, a profound sadness at the bitter recognition that the family I had always hoped for, the one that would be proud of my achievements and happy for my success, simply did not exist. I flashed back to my 16th birthday. I'd saved for months to buy parts to build my first computer. My father had discovered the components hidden in my closet and accused me of wasting money on toys when the family needed new car tires. He made me return everything and hand over the refund money. That computer, which could have been the start of my portfolio, sacrificed for tires on a car I was rarely allowed to drive. Then, my high school graduation. I received an academic achievement award and a scholarship. While other parents took photos and planned celebration dinners, my father had simply asked, "Will this scholarship cover all the costs? Or are we going to have to pay something?" The accomplishment itself meant nothing, only its financial implications for him. As these memories flooded back, it hit me. This pattern had been constant throughout my entire life. My achievements were valued not for what they said about my growth or character, but solely for how they could benefit my parents and sister financially. I had never been seen as an individual with my own dreams and needs, only as a resource to be tapped. Around midnight, I finally called Michael. Despite the late hour, he answered on the second ring. "What's up? Everything okay?" His voice was alert, concerned. I explained what had happened, my words pouring out in a rush. When I reached the part about my father demanding 80% of my salary, Michael let out a low whistle. "Harley, that's not family supporting each other. That's exploitation," he said firmly. "No reasonable parent asks for that kind of arrangement." "But they raised me," I said, echoing my father's justification despite myself. "Don't I owe them something for that?" "Parents choose to have children, and raising them is the basic responsibility that comes with that choice," Michael replied. "Supporting your parents in their old age is one thing. Becoming their cash cow is another entirely." We talked for nearly an hour, Michael helping me see the situation from outside the fog of family dynamics. He shared stories of his own parents, who celebrated his successes and refused financial help even when he offered it, insisting he save for his own future first. "What they're asking is not normal," he emphasized. "It's not what loving parents do." After hanging up, I drove back to my apartment, but sleep eluded me. I sat at my computer, researching family financial abuse. Article after article described dynamics that felt eerily familiar. Adult children guilt-tripped into supporting able-bodied parents, the weaponization of family obligation, emotional manipulation to extract financial support. I began calculating what my life would look like if I gave in to their demands. After taxes, my $400,000 salary would net about $270,000. Giving 80% of that to my family would leave me with $54,000 a year, significantly less than my current take-home pay. I'd be working a high-stress, demanding job while living with less financial freedom than I had now. A down payment for a home would remain a distant dream. Retirement savings? Minimal. And for what? So my father could retire early? So Amanda could pursue her boutique dreams without having to save or get a business loan like everyone else. I thought about all the times I had tried to establish reasonable boundaries. The time I'd offered to pay for a financial advisor to help my parents' budget, only to be accused of trying to control them. The time I'd suggested Amanda look into student loan forgiveness programs, only to be told I was being stingy. Every attempt at helping in a sustainable way had been rejected in favor of direct cash transfers that disappeared into the black hole of my family's finances. As dawn broke, I reached a moment of absolute clarity. This pattern would never end unless I ended it. No amount of money would ever be enough. No achievement would ever be celebrated for its own sake. The goalposts would always move, the demands would always increase, and I would forever be trying to buy the approval and love that should have been freely given. I realized that standing up for myself wasn't selfish, as my father had always claimed. It was necessary for my own survival and well-being. And perhaps, in some distant future, it might even be the catalyst for a healthier relationship with my family, though I wasn't naive enough to count on that outcome. With this clarity came a plan. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be without emotional cost. But for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself, my future, and my right to enjoy the fruits of my own labor. The decision felt simultaneously terrifying and profoundly liberating. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The path forward was clear, if difficult. I needed to break the financial ties that had kept me bound to unhealthy family dynamics for so long. This would require careful planning and quick execution before my resolve could be weakened by guilt or manipulation. My first stop was a new bank across town where I opened checking and savings accounts, providing my new work address for all correspondence. Next, I contacted my current bank and arranged to close my accounts once all outstanding checks and automatic payments had cleared, with instructions to transfer the balance to my new accounts. At a local phone store, I bought a new cell phone with a new number, which would become my primary contact. I'd keep my old phone active temporarily, but phase it out. Back at my apartment, I created a detailed inventory of my possessions, identifying what was truly important versus what could be replaced. I'd always lived minimally, a habit from years of financial insecurity, which now worked in my favor. My most valuable possessions were my computer equipment, important documents, and a few sentimental items from my grandparents. Online, I researched apartments closer to my new job. By midday, I'd scheduled 3 viewings for that afternoon. The second property I visited was perfect, a one-bedroom with a home office nook in a secure building with underground parking. The leasing agent, impressed by my new job offer letter and excellent credit score, approved my application on the spot. I signed a 12-month lease and paid the security deposit plus first month's rent from my savings. Next came the most tedious but necessary step, addressing the various bills I'd been paying for my family. Over the years, I'd somehow become responsible for their cell phone plan, internet service, various streaming subscriptions, and even occasional payments on my sister's student loans when she claimed to be short on cash. One by one, I contacted each company. I'd like to remove myself from this account, I told the cell phone company representative. The other lines should remain active, but I will no longer be financially responsible after the current billing cycle. Similar conversations followed with the internet provider, streaming services, and other utilities. For services that required notice, I scheduled the changes to take effect at the end of the current billing period. For Amanda's student loans, I simply removed my bank account from the automatic payment system. By late afternoon, I'd rented a small moving truck for the following day and purchased packing supplies. Back at my apartment, I began methodically boxing up my life. Clothes, books, kitchen items, electronics, all carefully packed and labeled. The efficiency of my packing reflected the clarity of my decision. Each sealed box was another step toward independence. That evening, I drove back to my childhood home one last time. I had deliberately chosen a time when I knew my family would be out. My father at his weekly poker game, my mother at her book club, and Amanda usually out with friends on Friday evenings. Using my key, I entered the silent house and made my way to my old bedroom, which had been partially converted to storage but still contained boxes of my childhood belongings. The room felt smaller than I remembered, the faded posters remnants of earlier dreams. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, running my hand over the worn quilt my grandmother had made. For a moment, nostalgia threatened to weaken my resolve, memories of rare, happy moments mixing with the more prevalent, difficult ones. I reminded myself that I wasn't erasing my past or my family from my life completely. I was simply establishing boundaries that should have existed all along. With renewed determination, I filled 2 boxes with the items that truly mattered: photographs, academic awards, the few gifts that had actually been thoughtful, a small collection of books that had shaped my thinking. Before leaving, I sat at the small desk and wrote a letter explaining my decision. The words came more easily than I expected, years of unspoken feelings finding their way onto the page. Dear Dad, Mom, and Amanda, by the time you read this, I will have moved to a new apartment and changed my contact information. This decision comes after much reflection on our relationship, particularly regarding finances. The demand that I turn over 80% of my salary to you was the final evidence that you see me not as a son and brother, but as a source of income. This is not a healthy dynamic for any of us. I have removed myself from all family bills I have been paying. These financial responsibilities are now yours, as they should have been all along. I am not doing this out of spite, but out of the necessity to establish boundaries that should have existed long ago. I need time and space to reassess our relationship. Any future contact will need to be based on mutual respect rather than financial expectations. Harley. I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it on the kitchen counter, where it would be easily found. Looking around the house one last time, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and liberation. Then I walked out the door, locking it behind me. The next morning, with the help of 2 movers I'd hired, I loaded everything from my apartment into the truck. By noon, I was unloading at my new place. The entire process was completed with military precision. A clean break from one chapter of my life to the next. That first night in my new apartment, sitting on my couch, surrounded by boxes, I experienced conflicting emotions. There was guilt, certainly. Years of conditioning making me question if I had done something terrible. There was anxiety about the inevitable fallout when my family discovered my letter. But overshadowing these was an unfamiliar feeling of lightness, as if a weight I'd carried for so long had finally been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, my financial resources were truly my own. My future belonged to me alone. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was at last mine to travel as I chose. The explosion came sooner than I had anticipated. At 8:30 the next morning, my old phone erupted with notifications, a barrage of texts and voicemails from my family. I had expected anger, but the sheer volume and intensity still caught me off guard. My father's voicemails escalated from confusion to outright rage in the span of 3 messages. "Harley, where are you? Your mother found your letter. Call us immediately so we can discuss this misunderstanding." Then, "I cannot believe you would pull this kind of stunt. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By running away like a child?" And finally, chillingly, "You listen to me, son. You have one day to come to your senses and apologize to your mother. She's crying her eyes out because of your selfishness. One day, or you will regret it." Amanda's messages were no less forceful, though her approach leaned more heavily on guilt. "How could you do this to us? Mom is devastated. Dad is furious. And what about me? I was counting on your help for my boutique. My dream is just worthless to you? I guess you've always been selfish, but this is a new low." My mother's messages were the hardest to hear, her voice soft and trembling. "Harley, sweetie, please call me. Just me, not your father. I don't understand what happened. We're family. We're supposed to help each other. Please come home so we can talk." I listened to each message, allowing myself to feel the pain and guilt they were designed to trigger. But I didn't call back. Instead, I sent a single text to all 3 of them from my old phone. "I need space and time. My decision stands. Please respect my boundaries." Then, I silenced the phone and focused on settling into my new apartment and preparing for my upcoming job. I had given myself a week between jobs to get organized and decompress, time that now proved essential for dealing with the family crisis I had precipitated. The messages continued throughout the day, alternating between anger, bargaining, and emotional manipulation. By evening, they had taken a darker turn, with my father threatening to come to my workplace and straighten things out in person. That was concerning enough for me to save the voicemail as evidence, just in case. The next morning, my old email inbox contained messages from extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins I rarely spoke to, all expressing their shock at my abandonment of my parents and sister. It was clear my father had been making calls, recruiting allies in his campaign to bring me back in line. Some messages were sympathetic to him, citing his sacrifices as a parent. Others were more measured, suggesting family counseling or mediation. My father's brother, Uncle Steve, who had always been somewhat of an outsider, sent a different kind of message. "Harley, I don't know exactly what happened, but knowing my brother, I can guess. Call me if you need someone to talk to who understands the family dynamics. Sometimes distance is necessary for health. Take care of yourself." That small show of support meant more than I could express. A reminder that not everyone viewed family obligations through the same distorted lens my parents did. 3 days after my departure, the situation escalated dramatically. I was at a coffee shop near my new apartment, preparing for my new job, when my phone lit up with a call from an unrecognized number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. "Is this Harley?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Diane from Human Resources at Horizon Technologies. There's a situation in our lobby I think you should be aware of." My stomach dropped as she explained that 3 people claiming to be my family were demanding to speak with me, becoming increasingly loud and disruptive when told I didn't start work until next week and wasn't in the building. "They're insisting on leaving a message with someone from your department," she continued. "Security is handling it, but I thought you should know." I thanked her, ended the call, and sat in stunned disbelief. They had tracked down my new employer and shown up in person, potentially damaging my professional reputation before I had even started. The boundary violation was staggering. That evening, I received an email from the HR director expressing concern about the incident and requesting a meeting before my start date to discuss the situation. The professional tone couldn't mask the underlying message. My family drama was now threatening my career opportunity. The stress began affecting my sleep and concentration. I found myself jumping at unexpected sounds, half expecting to find my family at my door. The building had secure entry, and I hadn't given them my new address, but their appearance at my workplace demonstrated a determination I had underestimated. After a week of escalating harassment, including my father somehow obtaining my new cell number and leaving increasingly threatening messages, I realized I needed professional help. I scheduled a consultation with an attorney specializing in harassment cases. The attorney, a straightforward woman named Janet Reeves, listened carefully to my account, reviewing the voicemails, texts, and email documentation I had preserved. What your family is doing constitutes harassment, she confirmed. The appearance at your workplace is particularly concerning as it crosses the line from personal conflict into potentially affecting your professional life. She outlined my options, which included a formal cease and desist letter as a first step, followed by a restraining order if the harassment continued. The idea of taking legal action against my own family felt extreme, but I was running out of alternatives. Think of it this way, Janet said, noting my hesitation. If these weren't your family members, but former business associates or acquaintances behaving this way, would you hesitate to protect yourself? She had a point. I authorized her to draft a cease and desist letter, making it clear that further contact at my workplace would result in legal action. The letter was delivered to my parents' house the following day. The response was immediate and predictable, a fresh wave of messages accusing me of betrayal, of choosing legal strangers over blood relations, of breaking my mother's heart. But notably, there were no more appearances at my workplace, suggesting the letter had made at least some impact. Meanwhile, I learned through a former neighbor that my family's financial situation had indeed deteriorated rapidly following my departure. The internet had been shut off for non-payment. My father's car had been repossessed. Amanda had been forced to pick up additional shifts at the boutique to help with expenses. Part of me felt guilty, knowing they were struggling. Another part recognized that this was simply the reality of living within one's actual means, something they had avoided for years by using me as a financial safety net. Their financial problems are not your doing, Michael reminded me during one of our regular check-ins. You didn't cause their situation by removing yourself from it. You just stopped preventing the natural consequences of their choices. It was a perspective I needed to hear repeatedly as I worked to deprogram years of conditioning that had taught me their problems were automatically my responsibility. As my start date at Horizon approached, I met with the HR director to address the family situation professionally. I explained that I was handling a personal matter that had briefly spilled over into the professional realm, assured her that steps had been taken to prevent any recurrence, and expressed my commitment to keeping personal issues from affecting my work. She was understanding but direct. Horizon values work-life balance, but we also expect our team members to ensure personal matters do not disrupt the workplace. I appreciate your transparency and the steps you have taken. I left the meeting with my job intact, but with a clear understanding that I was starting under heightened scrutiny. My family's actions had created yet another obstacle for me to overcome, this time in my professional life. The first few months after breaking ties with my family were some of the most challenging of my life. Despite the clear logic behind my decision, years of emotional programming didn't disappear overnight. I struggled with waves of guilt, moments of doubt, and the persistent question of whether I had done something unforgivable by prioritizing my own well-being. 2 weeks into my new job at Horizon, I recognized that I needed professional help to navigate these emotions. Through my company's health insurance, I found Dr. Karen Chun, a therapist specializing in family trauma and boundary setting. Our first session was revealing. What you are experiencing is a normal response to breaking deeply entrenched patterns, she explained after I recounted my story. The guilt, the second-guessing, even the physical symptoms like trouble sleeping, these are all common when someone steps away from a dysfunctional family system. Over the following weeks, our sessions helped me understand the dynamics that had shaped my relationship with my family. I learned about concepts like financial abuse, emotional blackmail, and the parentification of children. Most importantly, I began to recognize that my worth was not tied to what I could provide for others. Healthy family relationships are reciprocal, Dr. Chen emphasized. Support flows in multiple directions based on need and ability, not as a one-way obligation. As I gained emotional clarity, I also took practical steps to secure my future. With guidance from a financial advisor, I developed a comprehensive plan for my new income. I maxed out my retirement contributions, established an emergency fund, and began saving for a down payment on a condo. For the first time, I was planning my financial future based on my own goals and values, not on anticipation of the next family crisis. The harassment from my family gradually decreased, though it never fully stopped. The cease and desist letter had established consequences they seemed unwilling to test, though occasional messages still came through new phone numbers or email addresses. typically around holidays or family birthdays. 3 months after starting at Horizon, I felt secure enough in my position to approach the issue of my family from a position of strength rather than reaction. After consulting with Dr. Chun, I drafted a letter outlining terms under which I would consider providing limited financial support. My offer was structured and conditional. A monthly contribution of $2,000, paid not directly to my parents, but to a financial advisor who would help them create and stick to a budget. The support would continue only if they attended financial counseling sessions and demonstrated progress towards self-sufficiency. For Amanda, I offered to pay for business planning classes if she was serious about opening a boutique, but not to fund the business itself. The letter concluded with clear boundaries: no unscheduled contact, no discussions of money outside the established arrangement, and no disparaging comments or emotional manipulation. Any violation would result in immediate termination of support. I sent the letter through my attorney, maintaining the professional buffer I had established. The response took nearly 2 weeks to arrive, suggesting lengthy family discussions. My father's handwriting was instantly recognizable on the envelope. Inside was a terse rejection of my terms. "We don't need your charity with strings attached. Either you help your family properly or not at all." While disappointing, the response was not surprising. The offer had never been primarily about the money, but about establishing a framework for a healthier relationship. Their rejection confirmed what I had suspected. The financial support had been less important to them than the control it represented. "You gave them an opportunity to choose a different path," Dr. Chin reminded me during our next session. "They declined. It is their choice, not your failure." As months passed, I settled into my new role at Horizon, gradually building a reputation for innovative solutions and reliable delivery. The work was challenging but fulfilling, pushing me to grow professionally while providing the financial security I had worked toward for so long. My personal life began to expand as well. Freed from the constant drain of family crises, I had energy to invest in friendships and activities. I joined a local tech meetup group, started rock climbing at an indoor gym, and even took cooking classes, discovering interests I had never had time to explore. Through the climbing gym, I met Sophia, a software engineer with a quick wit and a refreshing directness. Our relationship developed slowly, beginning as climbing partners and evolving into something deeper. When I eventually shared my family situation with her, her response was supportive without being judgmental. "Families are complicated," she said simply. "You did what you needed to do for your own health." Sophia came from a close-knit family with healthy boundaries, a dynamic so different from my own experience that it seemed almost foreign. The first time I met her parents, I was struck by how they celebrated her accomplishments without taking credit for them, how they offered help without creating obligation, how they treated her as an adult with her own life rather than an extension of themselves. "Is this what normal families are like?" I asked Michael after that first meeting. "More or less," he confirmed. "Not perfect, but fundamentally supportive rather than extractive." 6 months into my estrangement from my father and sister, I received an unexpected email from my mother, sent from a new address I didn't recognize. Unlike previous communications, this one contained no guilt trips or demands, just a simple request to meet for coffee. Just the two of us. After discussing it with Dr. Chun, I agreed to a brief meeting in a public place. My mother looked older than I remembered, more tired, the lines around her eyes deeper. We sat across from each other awkwardly, years of unspoken feelings creating a barrier between us. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," she said after we had exchanged stilted pleasantries. "Things have been difficult since you left." She explained that they had been forced to downsize, moving from the family home into a smaller apartment. My father had taken on extra shifts at the dealership. Amanda had moved in with a friend to save on rent. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad," she added quickly. "Just so you know what has been happening." For the first time in our relationship, my mother seemed to be speaking as herself, not as an extension of my father. We talked for nearly an hour, avoiding the topic of money entirely, instead sharing small updates about our lives. Before we parted, she hugged me briefly. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I should have said that more. That meeting became the first tentative step toward a new kind of relationship with my mother, limited, but more authentic than what had existed before. We began exchanging occasional emails, sharing small parts of our lives without expectations or demands. My father and sister remained distant, unwilling to accept the new boundaries. I heard through my mother that my father dismissed my success as luck and my boundaries as selfishness, narratives that allowed him to avoid examining his own role in our estrangement. Rather than dwelling on what could not be changed, I focused on building the life I wanted. At the 1-year mark in my new position, I received an excellent performance review and a substantial bonus. With my savings and the bonus combined, I had enough for a down payment on a modest but modern condo in a neighborhood I loved. The day I signed the closing papers was significant, far beyond the financial milestone it represented. Standing in what was now my home, I realized how far I had come from the scared, guilty person who had packed his belongings in secret just 1 year earlier. I had established a career I was proud of, created a home that was truly mine, built relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, and most importantly, learned that taking care of myself was not selfish, but necessary. That evening, sitting on the floor of my new living room with Sophia and Michael, sharing takeout and champagne amid the boxes still waiting to be unpacked, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The journey had been painful, the losses were real, but the freedom I had found was worth every difficult step. Looking back at the past year, I realized that the $400,000 job was never really the point of my story. It was simply the catalyst that forced me to confront patterns that had been harmful for years. The true value of what I gained was not measured in dollars, but in self-respect, in boundaries honored, in the quiet dignity of owning my own life. For anyone facing similar struggles with family financial exploitation, know that it is possible to break free. Setting boundaries is not selfish, it is necessary. True family supports your growth rather than stifling it for their benefit. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for those who would take advantage of you, is to say no. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with loved ones who were taking advantage of your success? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support more content about overcoming family financial abuse and building healthy relationships. Remember, standing up for yourself is not selfish. It is necessary for your well-being, and even for those who may eventually learn from the boundaries you set. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength in your own.